Welcome, everybody. This is another episode of Masters of, put on by Cludo. Again, we're intending to have conversations with interesting people about their websites, managing complex, heavy content sites, and learn a little bit about what they've learned over time and lend some expertise to the audience. So today we have Gregg Turnbull from Larimer County, Colorado, joining us. Super excited to talk to Gregg. He's been at this game for quite some time. He can tell you about that. And Larimer County is obviously a beautiful place in Colorado with a lot going on as well. So I can't wait to hear about that. Gregg, first of all, thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Nick, for having me. It's
Yeah,
always a pleasure to talk to you guys. I always learn a lot about
absolutely.
what's happening in the world. Yeah.
Cool. Hopefully we can keep that going. I'd love for the folks that don't know you, haven't met you yet, maybe just give us a quick overview of who you are, how you got into the role that you're in, and kind of what you do over there for Larimer County.
Sure. So again, Gregg Turnbull, Director of Innovations and Insights. Really cool title. We dreamt that up, put words in a bag, grab some stuff out. But in this space, I've done a lot with just the website for a very long time. So 8 years, we rebuilt it 2 years into my tenure with Larimer County, and launched. My engagement with search specifically started when we had a really hard time finding certain things on our site. Launch time, we've fired things up, tried different tools, open source, other products, and that's what we landed on with Cludo, and had a great experience there. But I've done a lot within IT. I take on roles of big data, now AI, which I think everyone's doing that. I think everyone has that little byline working in the AI space. But overall, just working in the government, local government IT.
Yeah. And is there something that drew you into the government space originally, or is that just how it played out? Like, what was your path to
Yeah,
federal?
it was almost tripped into government space. So started off right out of school working in corporate America, Motorola, um, and it was an interesting time to be Motorola. It was like Y2K is right when I kind of entered the workforce. Then jumped to academia. So I spent a little time working for Arizona State University for a big research group there, the Biodesign Institute. Got my first paper published with a group I worked there, which is cool. Have that one little paper out there floating. And then it was moving up to Colorado. My wife is a native, and she had this call to move back to the mountains. So it was just trying to find something to pay the bills. But it was really an interesting time to jump into local government. There was this immediate need for many folks that were online that wanted a lot out of their government websites or their online engagements that weren't getting it. They were still like, download this document, print it out, and walk this into the office. So we lucked out and had a great group of folks from the leadership down to the folks that I worked with. And we got to really embrace that, and just, and to this day, we always get to try what's new and try and improve that point of engagement with our residents.
Yeah, super interesting. And I think we tend to interact with folks that are somewhat more on the early adopter side or want to innovate a bit. How does that show up for you and in your team in terms of how do you decide what to do? How do you decide what innovations to chase down? How does the prioritization process work? If you can shed some light on that, that'd be
Yeah, you almost have to have a Jekyll and Hyde mentality of like, okay, we're gonna go all in and be really crazy and creative. But on the other end of this spectrum, you've got users that are very dependent on the services, and there's a trust that you've built up over a very long time. And we're not necessarily just a corporation or a company that's trying to work towards, investor profits or revenue streams. But it's like, can this person get, the basic services? Can they, get help when they really need it from an emergency? So emergency management, folks that are out in remote locations, can they get an ambulance or some form of help when they need it? So even though we try to be adaptive and use new technology, we always have to have that, like I said, piece in our mind that this has to work. This has to be stood up. A/B testing plays a part in it. Like, we can launch certain things and say, okay, does this work? Does this work on all devices? And we do have to be very mindful that we work for 350,000 plus folks. They don't have a choice of who their local government is. So we have to maintain that relationship.
Makes total sense. It might be helpful just to hear a bit about your team. Who's involved? How does it come together? How do you think about how the team works?
Yeah, I think it plays that part, and even you're on my team, in a way, Nick. We lean a lot on our vendors to kind of play roles that we don't have in house. But I have two immediate developers, senior developers that work in the web team. I now have a team lead who's stepped into my previous role. So I now play this director part as far as just the web, but then we also have folks that focus on geospatial or maps or like where things are in the county using Esri products. We've got folks in the data, big data using BigQuery, doing real intensive BI work. And then all the way down to like process improvement. We've got folks that focus on relationships with an IT and all the departments. So that's my little world of my team. But coming back to web, like it's a really small group. So any tool that we lean on has to carry, we have to trust it. Two, it has to be accessible for their use. And then three, it has to continually perform. And as we adapt, we always lean on, our vendors to either adapt or lead the way with what we're doing.
It's also interesting to hear some of the structure in aligned with your title. I'm curious, maybe like as a grounding or a foundation. Clearly, the web and the digital experience is a part of the mission of Larimer County. But how do you think about the overall mission, how the web experience fits in, and is that changing, or is there a changing dynamics in that? I think you alluded to that a little bit, but I'd love to hear a little bit about the mission and how it transforms digitally.
Yeah, I think if anything, we're just continuing on this march that we've been on for quite a while. It's that no matter where folks are, what technology they're using, the web is kind of a hub or a central piece. And identity management is a big piece we've leaned in on, trying to work towards having like a central sign-on for our residents, and we're still working on that. It's done for our staff. Every staff member has one place they log in, and every tool that they touch, they lean in on that. But having that identity, having their data, the engagement of the web is always that center hub. And we try to build outside of that. So we try to have our communicators post to the web and then have it disseminate as it needs to. Vice versa, we love to have folks come to our site and get as much service as they can there. And that's why we need to make sure that whatever's on that tool really supports that engagement. And with the advent of new chatbot technologies and new AI that's engaging or acting on behalf of or being agents for those people, your web is still that central piece as far as data. So our hope is to have that be the digital front desk for Larimer County, and that's the busiest employee in the county is the website. Like most people get their information, they submit their content, they engage with that website, and that's what we try to make sure is one, it's working, people can understand it, that they can use it well, and that's what we're continuing to try to do. No matter what the new, phone is, we want to make sure that they have that same engagement, if not improved.
Yeah, makes sense. Makes sense. Something that you mentioned caught my ear a little bit, and it is around kind of thinking through what gets prioritized and how the team works together. Maybe in a specific example, you mentioned the hub and the single sign-on approach. What have you learned in that journey? I'm assuming it didn't all go exactly the
It's
plan.
still, yeah.
Any lessons that if somebody else was going to try and take on something like that, any learnings
Yeah,
you can share?
for sure. And I think if anything, you learn that you make these relationships with vendors, and there's a reason you make the decision to choose them. They do something very well, but they are not all at the same point in all of their technology stack. So for sign-on, for example, a lot of community or government vendors, they're still leaned in on like, hey, these are our people that we deal with. Like if somebody wants to go have this service, I'll control everything about that person. And we're trying to move away from that. We're trying to have that person be known, and have the same engagement and one identity that they can engage with. So we're still working on some very important vendors to have that single identity across those platforms. As far as priority, accessibility, especially in the state of Colorado, now Department of Justice has released some guidance. There's a lot of movement to make sure that whatever you do moving forward, to have that in mind. So engaging with vendors for accessibility for us is like, it's not a new thing. It's just that you're having a lot more leadership that are stepping in, asking you, where before you were asking for money towards this product. Now they're pushing it because it's in the Capitol, it's in the legislature. Accessibility is kind of the big push, at least in Colorado for sure.
Super interesting. It is that dynamic we hear from some of our customers quite a bit, where there's some sort of mandate that comes through, whether it's accessibility. We're seeing actually some from down on high kind of guidance in the AI realm too.
Mm-hmm.
How do you think about it? What are you applying now? What are you thinking about? Like, how does AI fit in
Yeah,
a practical way in your world?
it's interesting. So when I went to school, I was a systems engineer, and this is, like I said, long ago, late 90s. We were like trying our darndest as systems engineers to build these cool systems that could drive a car along a straight line, and fail, like basic things, that using AI, the trains that would like overlap each other and run it really fast and try and time it using AI to do these things that now you would think, oh, that's really simple, but at the time we thought we were so cool to be able to do that stuff. So that was the seed, and then just continuing like to keep tabs on things with neuroscience. But now it's here, now it's omnipresent to where everyone is in that space. As far as my role, I look towards a few things. One, it's this balance of how do we engage as an individual, like in the staff member side or county. We lean on policy. We try to put policy in place that helps protect not just ourselves but our residents. There's a little acronym I always think about when I talk to leadership: BOTS, BOTS. So we got to watch out for bias. We got to, make sure that the things we use aren't overtly biased, like that we're going out and buying product that introduces that bias.
Mm-hmm.
Ownership. We're not creating really cool pictures based on album covers of the coolest things we've ever seen, so we own nothing. So monitoring what the copyright laws are in place. The truth, we don't want it to lie. We don't want to put something out there in front of our residents that lie to them. Tell them we're open at 5 a.m. when we're not. And that last one, S, is security. So the data, like data is inherently the biggest issue with generative AI or AI is what data you put into these systems, you have to kiss goodbye and let float off into the ether. So we try to teach our staff and try to engage with it to say, this is the type of data that's meaningful and important in this tool. Different AI systems we lean on, and different security setups. We can put different data, but when you put it on your site or you engage with it, the publicly facing data has to be protected.
Mm-hmm.
So as far as AI, we're cautious and we're very optimistic as far as Larimer County's stance. So we're trying to use it. We lean in on new tools, but we try to, at least we're building out policies and strategies to try to protect ours and our own.
Right. That's super helpful. The bots framework, I think, is super smart. And it also gives folks a common vocabulary and a common way of being on the lookout for things. Because the reality is there's tools that any one of us can use right now. I could go to Perplexity and do a search and it will tell me
100%.
something. And like, do I have a way to evaluate whether that's something I can trust, or that's something that I should lean into, or that's something that a thread that I can pull? Is there like a specific example that you've used this bots kind of mentality or framework that it's been helpful? How does it practically come to life? Is it somebody brings something to you and you say, well, remember the bots? Like, how does
Remember
it
the bots. Remember your bots. It's been for sure helpful presenting to leadership, like to have something they can latch onto to understand, to kind of remember. But it has been, even just that idea, that framework, when we go out and we're very excited about different products or checking a box on an existing product. What we're finding is AI isn't just an inherent choice that we go and seek and start a new relationship with a vendor. It's a checkbox in our Google framework. It's a checkbox, and some checkboxes you can't avoid, like new Microsoft, they update your system, and now Copilot is sitting right there. It's your start button. It's ready for you. So it, again, I think it's twofold. You want to train and have people learn about what the dangers are, and inherently like let them use the tools, let them engage with the tools.
Mm-hmm.
But then it's sometimes you say, no, we can't check this box right now. If we're having conversations in a human service capacity in our county, and we're having sensitive information passed back and forth, I would love I'd love to have a at the end of the chat, which we're doing in other areas, to say, hey, summarize this chat. Give me like the high points. Where was this mentioned? It does a great job. But in that case, we can't let that data out. We can't let that data be ingested into these systems. So we have to avoid at certain times and in certain instances letting AI play a role in those business processes.
Yeah, makes sense, and presents some unique challenges when it comes to data and like data retention, data storage, data kind of presentation
Absolutely.
layers. Super interesting. We're recording this in the middle of May 2024, so it is that's
Yeah.
a disclaimer. If somebody watches this 10 years in the future,
Or a week later,
or a
because
week
that's
later,
how fast. Yeah, it seems that's
whatever
how
the
fast it's
case,
going.
like things change fast. It's true, especially when it comes to AI. Just yesterday, there were some announcements from OpenAI and Google, and there's more to come, obviously, on what seems like almost a daily basis. I guess a question for me that the audience might benefit from, and I would love to hear, is how do you keep up to speed? What's your approach to, you obviously are on the cutting edge, you're applying some of this stuff in the real world, but how do you keep up? There's a lot.
Yeah, it's an interesting. I have algorithms, especially on LinkedIn, that I'd say if anything, it's balance your worldview a bit. Look in academia, watch on LinkedIn. One of the things we did recently was we watched Google's and we compared their keynotes from the past 4 years and see how many times the word AI or generative AI is said.
Mm.
It's overwhelmingly like I almost think now that with Google leadership that they hand them the script 5 minutes before they walk out and they have to read it because there's new products and new names and Amazon's just as guilty. But the idea really is it's not as important to necessarily keep up on the cutting edge. It's to find the right product and vendor and engage with that vendor and lean in on what's the value, right? Where's it going to be valuable? Because a lot of these tools, like as you mentioned, it was so comical that there was these dueling piano situation with here's Google looking at the world and asking about the world, and here's Chat GPT, and they're giving grief. But I do think it's going to be more about where people actually engage with the tool and find value with it.
Mhm.
They're extremely impressive solutions. They can look at the world and they can tell you like, oh, you're wearing a Chat GPT hoodie right now. Those type of, statements. But at the end of the day, you say, well, how important is that really? How important is this? You're going to find these really great, like, oh my gosh, aha moments, but it's really where that value leads. There's just a lot of interesting things that get introduced, and it's going to be the people that take advantage and steer this power in a really beneficial way that are going to come out really like loving the technology, but there's all those dangers that you have to think through as well.
It's true. And part of what we try and think about, and I think is natural, is what use cases are actually in place that are most valuable and could be most helped by this. And so some maybe the data is super sensitive or has some very, very high bar for accuracy that AI is not there yet, and we don't want to apply that in that specific use case. And then there's others where it certainly applies kind of directly, and generative AI can be a big help and support things in a great way. I guess from your perspective, are there use cases that your residents are going through that you're trying to solve for, or is that the way that you apply kind of what you're going to gravitate and prioritize next? Is it use case based? Is it audience based? How do you think about that, getting it, picking again back to prioritization a little bit, but like, what is there a framework that you use where you're going to tackle this use case for this audience, or is it something else?
Right.
Yeah.
I think internally we're definitely pushing in on this awareness, and the other piece of that, we have this little acronym to try and identify where we're at on these spectrums a little bit. But awareness is what we're pushing internally. Like, hey, here are all these tools. Here's the things you're supposed to watch out for. Watch out for the bots, but the awareness. But then there's this A/B part where we're jumping into bridging. It's like, cool, you know about them, but now how do you find the value? What can you use it for? Our communicators are all day, every day using, for like writing things for an eighth grade level, making them readable, trying to engage. We use translation services all the time, and translation services are getting a lot better, continuously better with these tools. But then we get into, man, the C is eluding me. I have a C out there. D is discernment, is D is coming back and making sure you're not, breaking the world or setting it on fire with the tools you're putting in place. But the idea is that we're trying to like push out to our staff first and then our residents to like, hey, this is a great utility for the tool. There's value. We've thought through the safety issues. Right now, just for example, one of the things that it still has a thorn in my side a little bit, but we've lost multiple times. We're a happy second place team to some of these innovation awards for our website.
Mm.
And it was whoever had the chatbot out there right in front would win the award. And my boss was so like, you should just get a chatbot. But it was like, it's not ready. If you go back 5 years, 6 years, a lot of chatbots were just very Bank of America, like, how can I help you? And it would give you like 6 answers and you choose that answer and you're on your way. And my answer was never in the 6 answers. So I had this aversion to chatbots.
Yeah.
And now they'll answer like fluidly, like in Shakespearean sonnets, whatever you want is present to you in your website. And the danger there is it can be inaccurate, right? It could grab a PDF from 5 years ago that it ranked high, and that it's like, well, this is the sheriff, and here's the county commissioner, but it's not true. This is like 5 years ago. This is back in time, and it's treating it as real. And it's almost that time point that these chatbots need to become aware of, right? They need to be like, well, today, like right now at this time, here are the facts, because it's treating all this information. And I think I lean in on Cludo systems a lot, and I come back to Cludo a little bit, but being able to rank or put rules in place or play with the data or sanitize the data a little bit, drum up like, hey, this is really important or not important. I think that same thing has to be done in that public engagement with AI.
Mm.
And it's the training you're hoping has, impacts outside of the one-to-one. Like, I don't want to just tell you the sheriff is, new and it's a new sheriff and that's the one thing you take from this. But that maybe that document is aged and I need to be more mindful of, current information. So long way around, but that I'm really leaning in on what can I do with AI in that public space,
Yeah.
because it enables a lot. Like right now, if I ask Alexa about things, Alexa is like very one-to-one. I yell at Alexa, my children yell at Alexa, and get the wrong answer.
Mhm.
But I think that we're on that cusp of generative AI helping those systems, Siri, Alexa, become very personable. But then you have to really be mindful of they're very convincing, but that trust, you can't lose it as a county entity or as a local government entity.
Mm.
How do you maintain that trust,
Yeah.
especially with these tools?
Yeah. I think and what we see and what gets kind of promoted in the media are the examples of hallucinations and the examples of things where it's clearly an answer that's not right, or an image that gets produced that is extra wacky and people get put off by it. So it's interesting in terms of the feedback loop. The extremes get promoted and scrutinized quite a bit. It is interesting. One of the things that I think from a practical application standpoint, one of the things that has come to mind for us is there may be things, think of things like that are legal documents or things that are very statutory that need to have exact language. Having those as part of the generative AI, like not summarizing that, but just quoting it and setting it up only ever going to be seen as a direct quote rather than somebody taking the liberty, so to speak, of rephrasing it, which could change the meaning, especially
Yeah.
legal language that has to be very specific. So it's interesting how that's playing out.
Yeah, and then referencing. I think that's the other piece, is like, where did you get this? I think it's teaching a generative AI to be humble, right? To be humble, to say, hey, this is where I got the information. Like you said, provide the quote in full, and then allow the individual to say, hey, can you make that one sentence or shorten it or change it? Let that happen, that interaction, because it'll do that all day. It'll engage with you at that level. But you're right, like saying, oh, I found what you need. Here it is, present it, but not claim it as their own and change the wording, I guess.
It's a fascinating space for sure. And obviously we at Cludo love to learn kind of what customers are up to and how they're thinking about the world transforming around them and how they're impacting that. So it's always helpful to learn. I guess the thing that comes to mind for me too is when it comes to these different experiences and adding things and having an element of control and that feedback loop like we just talked about. I don't know, are there numbers, are there metrics, are there things that you're focused on in terms of like, we did this got better, I can tell because of this this change,
Yeah.
this number change or this metric?
So as far as like the engagement with that, like how people are engaging with our content, how people are engaging with, the back end. Yeah, we play a lot. Well, there's so many metrics, so many things that we can monitor, how folks engage. But a lot of things are geared towards like, what is the stream towards, making a sale or doing a cost or doing some end result. And it's a little interesting to be in a space where your goal is to engage somebody and get them out the door, off on their way, and happy in the fastest way possible, right? So return calls or veer offs or things where they can't find what they need, and that's why sometimes that's just as important to understand. And again, I lean on some metrics that I find with you guys and sometimes with Google, but if I can watch somebody come in, engage with content, and then all of a sudden they veer somewhere else, you can almost watch them lost. And if it was a physical space, you would watch them lost, looking around, being lost. That's what we monitor for. They're not finding what they need. Or the other one, the reverse of that is all of a sudden someone shows up at your door looking for something that you've never had requested by you. And this happened during COVID, but all of a sudden there was all this information about like, stay-at-home orders and all these things came marching to our website. And just through search or just through some, piece of data, that let us know like, oh, maybe I need to be mindful of this. Leadership needs to know that all of a sudden, like for example, the short-term rental market, that's a big deal. Like in rural areas that they don't have enough housing for the people that live there, and short-term rentals start to take over, and there's just a whole different dialogue that starts to take shape through search or through data. And I think no matter what switch I turn on, what AI switch I turn on, or those engagements and those things anonymize like this flow of communication and either what people are finding and what they're not finding. Those are two interesting things that we monitor and informs our decisions sometimes.
Yeah. And then being able to take that and do something with it, or add or subtract. I mean, that
Right.
there is an element of
There's many times I do subtract. There's or guide away, right? Just like anybody else, you put a sign up that says you've come the wrong way. You've come to the wrong place for this. I don't have driver's licenses for you. Or better yet, people come in with their court papers. We used to be called the courthouse, Larimer County Courthouse, based on statutes from the 1800s that the county clerk and this person, wherever they had their desk, that had to be the courthouse. Turns out having a courthouse with no juries, no judges, no courts is a bad deal. And there would be so many people that would walk through our door looking for that. And we have this digital, looks like a huge iPhone, but people could see right away. And the first thing on it now is, you are in the wrong place. Here's the walking directions to walk out the door and get to where you need to be.
Classic.
So we do it in the real world and on our website as well.
Yeah, that's amazing. That's amazing. Like a lineage from the past, still having an impact of.
Well, we changed the name of the building because of it. Yeah. We literally, and it was a big deal to do so, but we changed the name of the building.
I guess it actually leads us to one of the questions that I like to get from all of our guests. And I know I gave you a little bit of a heads up that this was coming, so no pressure, but hopefully I have a really, really good answer. UX, website experiences, customer experience in general, that is part of the world that Cludo is in and part of what these conversations are all about. Who's doing it really well? Who do you look up to? Who do you like aspire to be like? From that lens, and I realize that's fairly broad. So digital or non-digital.
Yeah, that's a trick, and I think there's this, for sure in this AI space. I think with as many eyeballs and things, I think that the ChatGPT, the mobile interface is pretty well done. Pi AI actually, and I think I don't know if it's Inflection, but it's Reid Hoffman's company. It's a much smaller AI, but Pi AI, its level of like how it engages and how it remembers and how it draws information out, to me, there's more of a spark there. I sometimes, if you're on ChatGPT, it's like, do this for me, ChatGPT, do my thing for me. But there's more of this back and forth and guidance and exploratory. And I think you're starting to see that hint in. And I think Microsoft recently stole away their person from Inflection because it was a really great product. So Pi AI, I think, is their interface online and on the web. Because again, I bounce like ideas off of it, like writing stories and having fun with it. And that's the one that freaks my kids out the most. That's the one I show them, then they run away. They're like, AI is taking over. So,
wow. If you can have that reaction from kids, that's impressive. That's good.
Yeah, I do think that it'll be little things again, like AI. It's going to sneak up on us, but how you teach somebody to use a new interface, I think, is ripe for a change. Most people try to build it into the interface because the interface is always changing. But I think having an AI in that space to really focus and say, hey, do you want me to teach you about the top 3 things that people are doing right now? Do you want me to teach you about the newest thing? But also it to back off because, you have the person that gets in there and knows their way around, and some of those systems jump in front of you and say, hey, do you want to, and they're just like, get out of my way. I think user engagement on layers like that or behaviors like that, like teaching and engaging. I know that, Khan Academy, they're jumping in with AI. They were on the demo with ChatGPT, but my kids are kicking the tires on that right now. But that back and forth and that engagement when I'm trying to learn something new, to be adaptive, I think is where there's going to be a lot of promise.
Right. Yeah, it's super interesting. And beyond like the typical click by click onboarding flow that you see sometimes, that you're right. All you want to do is click out of it so you can just play.
Yeah, and I have systems that jump up and they thought it'd be great, but I have like 5 pop-ups all at once to say like, look at me now. It's like the cat in the hat, look at me now, jumping out in front of you with all the spinning stuff. But yeah, that's where I think that there's a ripe opportunity, this adaptive to learn, based on the person.
Yeah. Very good. Besides Sam Altman or Satya Nadella from Microsoft,
That's who I
Reid
was. Yeah.
Hoffman you mentioned, anybody else that you'd like to see in a conversation like this?
Yeah. So we talked a lot about AI and we talked about guidance. I'm part of a group called the Gov AI Coalition, and we just got done. We had a big deliverable, and it has to do with like templates for how do you set something up, whether it's AI policy or it's vendor engagement, vendor scorecards, very similar to like the accessibility. There's a couple folks in that group that are great to work with. And Emily Royale, Anthony Fisher, Layla Doughty, all 3 of them I've worked with in that space. And it's exploding. We started a lot smaller, but there's a lot of folks jumping in and having the right conversations, like having adaptive policies. Like a policy in Seattle may not work for a policy in Larimer County, but really just focusing on what is the bots type thing, where what are some other areas that we need to focus on to make this actually be applicable and work in local government. So that group is an interesting group to talk to,
Awesome.
just to understand what's changing. I do think though, like you said, that diving into some of the leadership or go out on LinkedIn for a moment, and there's some great conversations that are happening in real time. It can be overwhelming because there's always an announcement. So try to look for those academics too. Look for the academics that are like pressing the envelopes or asking the hard questions. There's a million frameworks out there. Like, here's your safety, here's your policy, here's your framework. But that's why I lean on things like bots, just to try to be real quick and have the conversation, and it will adapt. But I think that just leaning in on those things are really important right now.
Great. On the Gov AI group, is there somewhere that folks that might be listening to this can learn more about that group?
Yes, it's based out of San Jose, but if you Google, you Bing, you just look up the Gov AI Coalition.
Awesome.
And they've done enough promotion now where they do show up in the ranks, but they are based. It's partnered. It's hosted out of San Jose. That's where Layla is located. She's the privacy and AI coordinator there in the city of San Jose. But it's a great group, good conversations. I meet new folks all the time that when we were doing our policy, I worked on the policy group, so we were writing the policy templates and trying to think through the lens of like, hey, what do we need to ask vendors when we're engaging them? Very similar to what we do with accessibility. How do you train your models? Where's this data located? What vendors are you using? You know, how do you store your data? It's a lot of great groups that are forming. But yeah, like I said, jump out in the sea of all that's going on, and just don't be overwhelmed, and don't worry too much if you don't know the latest and the greatest. Because while we were talking, there's been probably like, you know, 1 million announcements on new products.
Little notifications are going off.
That's right. Exactly.
Well, that is super good advice and really good insights throughout. It was great talking to you, as it always is, Gregg, and I appreciate it again for you taking some time with us. I think this is super valuable for the audience, and you know how to find Gregg out in Larimer County, and some other resources we'll add to the show notes too. But thanks again, Gregg, and thank you all for listening in on Masters of from Cludo. Thanks.
Thanks, Nick.